third Conroe Expo. And these have been going on in the Dallas area for almost 30 years. And this is the third one in the greater Houston area. Looks like it needed to come here. So happy to see everybody. So we're moving along every 30 minutes with a new speaker. We've got about 1 minute before our next speaker starts. And as long as we do, I'm going to talk about her. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay, Rebeca Eigen and I used to be neighbors when I lived in the South Houston area. And so we've known each other a long time. And I've watched her evolve as a human being and as a businesswoman and a teacher. And she's just an amazing human being. And I'm just so delighted that she's here to share her work, because I think shadow work is one of the things that many of us avoid because it's not fun all the time. And yet there's so many gifts in our shadows, right? So I'm just delighted that she's here to share her knowledge and her wisdom and her talents and her information. So please help me welcome Rebeca Eigen.
Thank you. When I started doing all of this, people would ask, how did you get into all of this? So I'd like to tell you all the story of how that happened. Back in the late 80s, I was going to a metaphysical Christian church where they teach the power of positive thinking. And it was a very uplifting, inspiring, and a wonderful place to be. And I was learning how to think positive. So as I was going around being totally into my positive, loving side all the time, which is what I consider to be my ideal, I was getting darker and darker and darker in the unconscious, and I didn't know it. And in '88, I ordered this report. It is a psychological horoscope analysis report based on our birth chart, the time, place, and date of our birth. And it's written by a Jungian analyst who is also an astrologer, and she's the world's most famous astrologer. And when I ordered this report and I read it, I mean, you can see I underlined just about everything in the whole report. And when it got to the shadow, I'm like, I'm not like that. And I put it in the closet and forgot about it. So as I was going through this, a friend of mine handed me some cassettes of a Jungian analyst in training who was also an Episcopalian priest. And his cassettes were intriguing me. He was making me think. So I decided I want to go with you one Sunday and put a face on this person that I was listening to. It was very different from metaphysical love and light. He was really making me think. So I go to see him, and I sat there in the Sunday school class listening to him, and then I went with her to the Mass, and I couldn't stand him. I mean, the hair on my arms was creeping. It was just like, she could feel it. And she said, do you want to leave? And I said, yes. So I go home, and I start obsessing about him, which is how you learn about a shadow quality in you. What I saw in him was that he was negative and cynical and depressed. And I just thought, maybe I need to go over there and give him a positive thinking tape or something, to uplift this guy, because that was my philosophy of life. But he said the word shadow in one of those cassettes. And I somehow at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I thought, didn't he say the word shadow? Yes. I go to the closet and I get this out, and it says that I am so uplifting and inspiring to people. I'm a lot of air and fire, and realism and cynicism are opposites. So he was becoming cynical and depressed because he was leaving the Episcopal Church and becoming a Jungian analyst full time. So he was in a transition, right? But the reason I couldn't stand that in him was because it was also in me, and I didn't know it. When I read this, I started crying. Like all of the negative things I had repressed and shoved down into my unconscious for years started coming up for me, and I was in this black funk for days. And then I decided, you know what, I need to go meet this man.
So I go to the Episcopal Church and I have an appointment with him personally, one-on-one. And he said, you weren't imagining things. I'm going through this transition, but it's also in you, in your shadow, or you wouldn't have even noticed it. So he happened to be teaching a 12-week course in analytical psychology at the Jung Center, and I signed up. And the rest is history. I mean, I studied with him for 30 years, and I love his work. So our shadow is everything about us that is unconscious, repressed, denied, suppressed, and hidden from our awareness. We don't know about it. It's completely unconscious. So the rising sign, or the persona, is what we do identify with. That's our highly idealized version of who we think we are, but we are so much more than that. So when I started studying Jung and realized that the shadow is directly below that you have to go through the shadow to get to the male and female within you, and Jung called that the anima and the animus, and then the self is who's orchestrating all of these events. This is our higher consciousness, and Jung called it the imago Dei, and God within is what we can say about the self. And it is not only the center of our psyche, it is the circumference. So the self knows about everything about us. And in astrology, our first house in astrology, whatever time you were born, the first house is your rising sign. Well, this is what we identify with. And the exact opposite is our marriage partner. So we put our shadow onto our partners so that we can see ourselves. So every relationship begins that way, through projection and through transference. And I'll explain what a projection means. For those of you who don't know it, raise your hand if you've never heard that word. Okay, projection is putting something outside of you on another person that's actually inside of you, but you only see it in them, like I saw it in that priest. So it's an unconscious psychological mechanism that is always happening. And the other thing is transference. Transference is we transfer our history with our mother and father and their relationship. We transfer that onto our partners as well. So Freud said there are 6 people in the marriage bed. Their parents, your parents, and yourself. So there are 6 people in that relationship. And in astrology, we are all on a crucifixion. This is what we identify with. This is our partner, this is our father, and this is our mother. And whatever signs are there, those are the parts of us that we have to integrate. And whatever planets are in the marriage house, we have to share those in an equal and balanced way with the partner in order to have a successful relationship. So we do 3 things with projection. We put it on you. You're like that, I'm not. 2, we ask somebody else to carry it for us because we refuse. So often I'll look at a couple and they have the same energy, but they've split it up. I'll be this part of you if you'll be this part of me. And this is unconscious. We do this from the very beginning without even knowing we're doing it. And what's really interesting is when you study Jungian psychology, we didn't choose our partners. Our unconscious chose our partner. We didn't have a choice. That's where you feel like a compulsiveness when you're in love. And it's like taking the car keys away from a drunk. You can't talk that person out of it. It's compulsive. Anything that's compulsive is a complex. And the shadow is a complex that we all have. So the other thing we do with projection is that we will be acting like that all over the place and we don't even know we're doing it. So that's another thing that can happen. So we want to know our whole self. And this work, shadow work, and I've written a book about it, it's about bringing these unconscious contents to consciousness so that we can share that with another person instead of be completely in the dark about who we are and who they are. There are no accidents, none, 0, zip. I don't care how painful it was. I don't care how awful that person was. Whoever you married, they are a part of you. And when you can learn about that, then you won't have to keep repeating it like we all do. You know, we repeat it. We marry that person, we leave that person, or we leave that boss because we didn't like that boss. And then we get another boss who's just like that. And it keeps repeating over and over until we can see that that's a part of us. So all of us have had experiences where we've said something or we embarrassed ourselves and we walk away going, why did I say that? You know, who inside me said that? Well, that was our shadow. It's trying to get us to pay attention to it. Because what happens is if you'll work with your unconscious will work with you and will help you to learn about your inner wholeness. And take something that you identify with that you think is negative. Like, I'm really blunt and honest. And I can be rude sometimes by being so honest. Well, that's not shadow. I know about it. So shadow is what we know nothing about. It's like completely unconscious. And life is internal, not external. Everything that is happening to us is part of our own energy or it wouldn't be happening. And when you really know this, it's like cool. Because you start to see the synchronicities that are occurring all the time. And the more willing we are to be conscious of even our dark side, even our negative qualities that we've projected onto the other person, then we can take those back and allow those to be inside of us, but in a temperate way. Take, for instance, when I got married, my ex-husband was like so practical and so reliable, and I just thought he was wonderful. He gave me a feeling of safety and security. And so he was extremely responsible. Well, I was the exact opposite. I was irresponsible. I was the one throwing parties. I was the one gathering everybody together socially. I'm a Libra. And that was my modus operandi. And he was the total opposite. Well, he became a stick in the mud, a person who was unwilling to risk. He became the opposite extreme to compensate my opposite. And we were two people, what is that? The Odd Couple movie? We were like Felix and Oscar. And, most couples get into a relationship and they're drawn to a specific part of that person. The unconscious has brought that person to you. And you'll start polarizing with each other. Two extremes start happening. There's a compensatory nature to our psyche. It compensates for us when we are out of balance. And so the energy of who we are is trying to become whole. And it will bring these people to us in a repetitive fashion. Because whatever one does not live, lives against us. That's the truth. It will live against us in the extreme of the other person. And when we can talk about this, the seventh house is an air house. And what that means is it's about objectivity. It's 180 degrees away. It's about communication. It's an air house. That means the element of air is about thinking and processing and communicating. And that is the part of us that we need to develop with that person. So there is a teleology in life, and teleology just means it's leading somewhere. Everything wants something from us. And as we go through life and we think things are happening to us, they're not. They're happening for us. And it's called synchronicity in Jungian psychology. Synchronicity is that there's this parallel thing going on that's going on in the unconscious and in the psyche, and it's paralleled outside of us. And the alchemists had this famous dictum: as above, so below, as within, so without. So So everything in the universe is connected. Everything, the animals, the plants, the rocks, the trees, everything. And when we get into a dialogue with this, it's pretty cool. So instead of looking at life as I'm a victim of what's happening to me, we can look at it like, oh, you're trying to help me through this difficult relationship. You're trying to evolve me. You're trying to help me grow. Wow, thank you. You know, so we can get into a correspondence with what's going on inside of us, with what's going on outside of us. And the seventh house, because it's 180 degrees away, it's the part of us we least identify with. We don't see that as ourselves. We see it first by falling in love. So raise your hand. Have you ever fallen madly in love? And have you ever met anyone you couldn't stand? Say hello to your shadow. Because our shadow, our partner, will have to suffer to become our shadow if we don't know about this that's going on. And there's a fascination that takes place. And I'm going to read a quote by Carl Jung that's in my book. Whenever we fall in love, there's a fascination. It's not just a physical attraction. We can be physically attracted to a lot of people. That has nothing to do with projection. Projection is when we have a fascination. A fascination of this kind is never exercised by one person upon another. It is always a phenomenon of relationships, which requires two people, insofar as the person fascinated necessarily has a corresponding disposition. But the disposition must be unconscious, or no fascination will take place. The fascination is a compulsive phenomenon in the sense that it lacks a conscious motive. It is not a process of will, but something that rises up from the unconscious and forcibly obtrudes itself upon the conscious mind. My teacher, Pittman McGehee, said, if you want the projections to fall off, marry the person. It works every time. Because now you're starting to see who they actually are instead of who you thought they were, which was a projection of your own unconscious. And as you each get to know each other and you work on coming to the middle, which is the answer to all of this, it's learning about the opposites so that you can come to the middle with another person in a healthy, logical way that is not a condescending thing. You know, you're like that, I'm not, and I'm going to change you. And women tend to be wanting to change men, and men think if I marry her, she's going to stay the same. Well, no, you're going to grow. We have to grow. We're continually growing. So the fascination will fall off once we get to know that person. And being wounded by love and falling out of love is necessary to become whole. We cannot keep that idealization, which is a defense mechanism, on that person and actually get to know who they are. And two people who are trying to keep their ideal relationship going by being dishonest with each other, by not saying what they really feel, get further and further and further apart. And there are songs. I pulled one out from my book. A song written by Bobby Braddock and sung by Martina McBride. It's called Strangers. Two strangers passing in the hallway barely touch each other's heart. Now they're pretending, two shadows blending, but they're a million miles apart. Soon she'll be packing up her suitcase and they'll be dividing all the blame. They know how they started, now empty-hearted. They don't have a clue how they became strangers, the world's greatest lovers, and now they are strangers. That's what happens if we let the projections continue without taking back our own opposite from our partner. I had to become like my ex-husband. I needed to grow up. I needed to buy a car, build a business, buy a house. I had to do everything he was doing. But I didn't like that about him because I thought he was stifling my creativity and not willing to risk. Well, he needed to learn from me. He needed to risk. He needed to develop some of my intuitive capacity, and I polarized. But that is why that partner has been brought to you in the first place, so that you can each grow together. We need to change what our culture views about love. We need to become best friends instead of falling in love with an ideal picture of who we think that person is. Best friends tell each other the truth. They don't lie to each other. They don't try to keep a facade going just to keep the peace. That's negative Libra energy when you're trying to keep the peace by lying all the time. Little white lies, right? She's laughing, you must be a Libra. So we need to be able to offer our partner objectivity and freedom. Freedom to be who they really are. So instead of asking the universe, why is this happening to me again? We need to ask what? What does the unconscious want from both of us? This is not, I'm going to fix you or I'm going to change you. We're going to change each other as we evolve. And if we're willing to do this, it's painful. I mean, you have to own your stuff. You have to look at your dark side. You have to look at the things that you've refused to look at. And then you have to be willing to meet them, your partner, halfway. And I tell people, if your partner is not willing to meet you the other half of the way, then you walk away as if your life depended on it, because it does. We need to be willing to be together as partners, not as parents. Because the mother and the father in us, if we're wanting their approval, we're still with mom and dad. We haven't even left home yet. Seriously. So liberation is knowing that there is a sacred marriage that is taking place within everyone. We have a masculine if we're a woman, and we have a feminine if we're a man. And they're inside of us. And Carl Jung called that the anima and the animus. We can't even get to the sacred marriage without going through the shadow. So that is the first step into going into our own unconscious. And again, life is about consciousness. It's about bringing what's unconscious up to our awareness so that we can be real. And Carl Jung said, I would rather be real than be good. Because being real is being authentic. And only two people who are separate can unite. If we're projecting a part of us onto them, we haven't got ourselves yet. Until we have our own wholeness, we can't become a part of another person or a partner to another person. And we are leaving the age of Pisces. The age of Pisces is over. That dreamy, oh, I'm so in love. Well, what do you love about him? I just love the way I feel when I'm with him. That's a projection. We look at people through a veil, and it's an illusion. It's an illusion of who we think they are. Well, we need to throw the veil away and lift it so that we all can see the truth and have the freedom to be real with another person. And that is where we're headed in the age of Aquarius. The age of Aquarius is about being best friends, not one up and one down. Does anybody have any questions from what I've said so far? All right, well, I'd like to hand this out. When I started teaching this work, see if I can just give you a few to pass down. My mother and father watched a VHS of my talk. And my mother sent me this Kathy cartoon that's on the back. No, because I don't give these out when I'm just at the table. I only give them out when I'm singing. In the Kathy cartoon, it's really interesting. Yes.
I was wondering, when you have someone who's triggering you in the way that you're talking about, right? What type of exercises or techniques would you suggest using to kind of divulge deep into that if you are ready to address something like that within yourself?
Well, because I'm an astrologer, I think astrology is incredibly valuable. It is a tool for self-awareness like no other. And there is no other psychological system. You know, if you go to a psychologist, you're going to be there for years. And you're also going to do behavioral psychology, where Carl Jung was the first to understand that we have predisposed patterns that are inside of us. We're born that way. You can have 6 children in a family, and they're all completely different. They all look at their parents different. They're born at a different time frame of each child will be born at a different time frame. So they have a completely different birth chart. So what I would say to you is to learn about yourself through your astrology, number one. And these reports are $65 because postage and handling, they're cheap. This is, one girl came to me and she said, that's like 10 years of therapy. What's in that report? It is. And that's how valuable astrology is. And you know, when I first started teaching astrology or doing astrology, I was astounded at how accurate it was and how it actually is that we're connected to the entire cosmos. We are all really one. If we understand that everything is connected. So all this war and craziness that we're experiencing now as a collective, it's ridiculous. You know, Libras are probably the sign most aware of the opposites, but everybody has Libra in their birth chart somewhere. Everybody has Libra. And if you learn about your shadow and you talk to your partner when they trigger you, if you sit down with them, I have lots of YouTubes you can watch together. I have articles I've written on my website, and I've been writing a series for My Indigo Sun, which is an online magazine, and this is the 6th month that I've written, and every month I talk about a sign and what could be in their unconscious, the opposite. And that's just one part. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to see your shadow in my book. People that you can't stand, people that you go on and on and on about, that you have to go tell this person and you have to go tell that person and you can't get over it, people you obsess about. There's a lot of different ways to see your shadow, but it's really cool if you have a partner to do it with. And you can't see yourself without a partner. You can't. Anybody else?
You mentioned partners, but can it also be best friends? There's certain things with best friends that you love the person, but there's this one little aspect that just drives you beyond madness.
Yes.
So that's your subconscious.
And this can be children and parents.
Okay.
And this can be bosses, and this can be cousins, and this can be neighbors. Really, learning about your shadow will benefit you in every relationship that you're in. So if 2 people can learn about their shadow, and you don't have to make them do it, you can learn about your own shadow and take back the projections. And nobody doesn't project. We all do it. It's unconscious. Thank you for coming to hear me.